17. "What's that sound?" Norik asked, looking up from the pattern he had drawn in the sand. Close to his side, Galiona shook her head. "I hear only thunder, my knight." He rose, listening again. "Sounds like battle, from the direction of the city." "Perhaps a celebration. Maybe it's the Sultan's birthday." Norik frowned to himself, suspicious of her continual denial of what he certainly recognized. Although his memories and those of Bartek had intermingled to the point where it had become hard to tell one from the other, both sets of memories now aided him in determining that he heard correctly. The clatter, the shouts, they all spoke of violence, of bloodshed. A part of him felt tempted to join in. No, he had more important things to do. Horazon's tomb, what the beguiling witch evidently called the arcane sanctuary, had to lie somewhere near, perhaps even beneath where he presently stood. He knelt down again, ignoring Galiona's momentary look of relief. Something about the pattern he had drawn, an upside-down triangle with circles around each corner and 3 crescents beneath, did not look right. That the fighter should not even have known of such spells no longer bothered him. Bartek had known them. Therefore, Norik Vizarin did. "What's missing?" The witch hesitated. "One of 2 things. To search for a person, you would need a pentagram in the middle of the triangle. To search for a place, you would need a larger pentagram surrounding all the rest." She made perfect sense to him. Norik grimaced at having forgotten something so simple. He rewarded her with a smile. "Very good." Despite the fact that her magical skills augmented his own growing abilities, and her physical charms enticed his baser nature, not for a minute did the veteran soldier trust his new companion. She told half-truths and hid much from him. He could sense her ambition. The enchantress saw him as useful to her own ends, just as he saw the same where she was concerned. So long as she aided his efforts, Norik had no trouble accepting her lies. However, if she tried to betray him later on, he had no compunction about dealing with her as he would have any traitor. Some part within him still did battle with what he had become. Even now, Norik sensed that such thoughts as he had just had about Galiona went against what the veteran had believed in most of his life. Yet, it seemed so easy to accept those thoughts now. His mind shifted back to his task. He had to find Horazon's tomb, although why still remained a mystery to him. Perhaps when he did discover its whereabouts, then the reason for the quest would finally become clear. He drew the larger pentagram, choosing to try to find the sanctuary rather than the man. Horazon would be little more than bones, making it somewhat more difficult to fix upon him. The edifice itself represented a larger, more distinct target for the spell. "Have you cast anything such as this before?" Galiona gave him a proud look. "Of course I have." Her look faltered slightly. "But I've never seen the arcane sanctuary, nor do I have anything from it." "That'll be no problem." Norik already had a plan in mind. He felt certain that he could have both uttered the necessary incantation and focused on the location, but that would have forced him to spread his thoughts and will too much, likely increasing his chance for failure. The arcane sanctuary had already appeared to be a place quite unwilling to reveal itself. Even after the armor had fought off Drognan, some other force had pushed Norik away from his goal. As with Bartek's own tomb, Horazon's resting place had probably been built with much security in mind. The creators had obviously not wanted it defiled or ransacked, and had cast powerful protective measures, such as those the soldier had encountered in Drognan's chamber. But with Galiona casting the spell, Norik could focus fully on their destination. Surely that would work. If not, he explained it to the witch, who nodded. "It can be done, I think. We must be of one mind, though, or else our own thoughts might work against us." She reached out her hands. Norik placed his own in hers. Galiona smiled at him, but something about that smile repelled the veteran rather than attracted him. Again, he saw raw ambition in her eyes. The sorceress thought that by proving her usefulness to her companion, she could eventually control him. That, in turn, brought more dark thoughts of his own. Thoughts of what he would do to any who believed that they could do such. There could be only one master, and that had to be Norik. "Picture it," she muttered. "Picture where you want us to go." In his mind, Norik imagined the tomb as he had seen it the first time. He felt certain that the initial vision had been the true one, that the force trying to keep him from the sanctuary had afterward attempted to confuse his memory. The robed skeletons, the stone coffin with the symbol of the dragon over the crescent moon, these surely had to be the true images of the tomb. Holding tight, Galiona leaned back, her eyes closed and her face toward the sky. She swayed as she muttered the incantation, pulling at her companion's gauntleted hands. Norik shut his own eyes, the better not to be distracted by the witch's body, while he pictured Horazan's resting place. An eagerness swelled within him. This would work. He would be transported to the arcane sanctuary. And then what? Norik had no time to divine an answer to that question, for suddenly he felt his entire body lighten, as if he had become more spirit than flesh. The only tug of weight he felt at all came from his hands, where the sorceress still gripped him tight. "Nazarius Ero!" cried Galiona. "Arona G!" The fighter's body crackled with pure energy. "Arona G!" A great sense of displacement shook Norik, and in the next moment his feet landed on hard stone. Eyes immediately opening wide, Norik Vizarin looked around. Web-enshrouded walls greeted his gaze, and within those walls he saw a line of statues, each distinct in face and form, staring back. Not all of them had names that he could recall, but among them he spotted more than one who had known him well, and known his brother, Horazan, too. But no, Horazan was not his brother. Why did he keep thinking that? "We've done it," Galiona cried, having at last registered their surroundings. She flung herself on him, kissed him with a fury that could almost not be denied. Yet Norik desired nothing more than to push her away. "Yes, this is it," he replied, once he had managed to peel her tentacles from his body. "There is nothing we can't accomplish together," she cooed. "No one who could stand in our way." Yes, Galiona definitely sought to seal their alliance. The seductive witch understood full well the power he wielded, the power the suit had at last given to him. If she could have, Norik had no doubts that she would have tried to wear the armor herself, and thereby cut out any need for a partner. The sooner he rid himself of her, the better. Turning from the devilish woman, Norik looked down the ancient, musty corridor. A peculiar, yellowish light illuminated the abandoned edifice, a light seemingly without source. He could not recall it from his first incursion into this dark realm, but since everything else looked as it should, Norik paid the one difference little attention. His goal was at hand. "This way." Without waiting to see if the sorceress followed, Norik stomped down the corridor in the direction he felt certain that the sarcophagus lay. Galiona hurried to catch up, the dark-skinned woman slipping an arm around his own, as if the two were lovers in the midst of a moonlit walk. He did not struggle free, aware that this way he could also keep her under watch. Now and then, a face familiar to him stared out from the dust-ridden statues. Norik marked each with satisfaction, remembering their order from the vision. Not only did they prove that he headed in the correct direction, but particular faces indicated to him that the final chamber had to be only a short distance further. And yet something about the statues also caused the veteran some unease, for although outwardly they seemed identical to those he recalled, minute alterations in detail began to haunt him. Certain features on some of the faces looked ever so slightly off. The shape of a nose, the curve of a mouth, the strength of a jaw. Most of all, the eyes tended toward different appearances. Never completely, but enough to make Norik finally pause at one in order to look. "What is it?" Galiona whispered, anxious to move on to their ultimate destination. The face he stared at, the face of one Oskul, a round-headed, officious mage who had briefly been Horizon's sponsor to the Viserai Council, resembled much the visage as Norik's memory recalled it, but the eyes should have been narrower, and the artisan had also given the orbs a sleepy look, not at all in keeping with the ever-active personality of the man. Nothing else about the statue seemed out of place, but the eyes proved to be enough to disturb him yet more. Still, Norik had been in the tomb for only a short time, and had spent only a fraction of it among the ghostly sculptures. Whatever mistakes he now recalled likely had more to do with the artist's failing rather than anything else. "Nothing," the soldier finally remarked. "Come on." They journeyed on for a few minutes more, and at last entered the crypt. Norik smiled as he studied the ancient site. Here, everything looked as it should. In the niches on the left and right, the skeletal figures of the Viserai sorcerers silently greeted the newcomer's arrival. The vast stone coffin atop the dais matched perfectly his vision. The coffin. "Horizon," he whispered. With growing eagerness, Norik dragged Galiona toward the sarcophagus. The horror he had suffered during his dream visit to this place had been all but forgotten. All Norik wanted to do now was open the coffin. He left the witch to the side, then reached up to take hold of the lid. At that moment, his gaze slipped down to the clan markings again, something about them snaring his attention. The dragon remained as it had been, but now below it lay a fiery star. He stepped back, the truth dawning slowly on him. There had been too many errors, too many differences in detail. What's wrong? Why didn't you open it? Glaring at the traitorous markings, the veteran fighter snapped, "Because it's not real." He waved his hand at the legion of dead mages. "I don't think any of this is real." "But that's mad." Galiona touched the coffin. "It's as solid as you or I." "Is it?" Norik extended his hand, and as he had hoped, in it he now held the sinister ebony sword. "Let's see what exactly the truth is." As Galiona watched, in both astonishment and dismay, the soldier raised the sword high above his head, then brought it down hard on the massive sarcophagus. The blade cut through without pause, and yet no line appeared in the coffin. The two halves of the great stone monument did not separate and collapse, and the tattered bones of Horizon did not tumble to the floor. Illusion, or something akin to it. He turned to the horrific throng lined up against the walls, glaring at the dead as if they were to blame. "Where is he? Where's Horizon?" "Perhaps down another passage," suggested Galiona, her tone indicating she did not completely trust his sanity at the moment. "Yes, maybe so." Without waiting for her, he charged out of the crypt. For some distance, Norik followed the single corridor, looking for a side passage, a doorway. Yet not once could he recall having seen one. In both versions of his dream, it had always been only this single passageway. The great arcane sanctuary had always consisted of only this and the actual burial chamber itself. Hardly the immense edifice one would have expected. Unless what he had seen had been designed simply for the benefit of curious and greedy intruders, and the rest lay hidden elsewhere. The frustrated fighter paused to glare at the statue of one of his, Bartek's, former rivals. The bearded man smiled in what Norik felt a very mocking manner. That brought him to a decision. He raised the black blade again. "What do you plan to do this time?" snapped Galiona, her patience with him having finally gotten thin. Great power he might wield, but so far Norik had evidently not impressed her with his running about in circles. "If there are no passages, I'll make one of my own." He glared at the statue, desiring very much to wipe the condescending smile off its face. Here would be the perfect location to begin cutting his way out. Norik held the sword ready, determined to bring down the mocking effigy with his first blow. But as he swung, as the blade came within inches of beheading the smiling statue, Norik's entire surroundings fragmented. The floor rose, and the walls pulled away, the rows of statues seeming to fall back as if fainting, the enshrouding webs folded in on themselves, utterly vanishing. Stairs bloomed like flowers, twisting and turning. Part of the floor ceased rising and instead dropped lower, leaving the two standing near a precipice. The only thing that remained consistent through the growing anarchy was the yellowish illumination. "What have you done?" Galeona cried. "You fool! It's all falling apart." Norik could not answer her, unable even to keep his footing. He fell back, the heavy armor dragging him down. His weapon flew from his grip, and as it did, it faded away. The ground shook, keeping him from rising, and worse, rolling him toward the edge. "Help me up!" he called to the sorceress, growing desperate. The gauntlets tore at the stone floor, but could not get a grip anywhere. Around him, the arcane sanctuary continued to transform itself, without any noticeable rhyme or reason, almost as if the tomb had gone into convulsion, as a human might. Galeona looked his way, hesitated, then looked to her right, where a stairway had suddenly formed. "Help me! Damn it!" She sneered at him. "What a waste of my time. You, Augustus, Zazax, all of you. Better I relied only on myself. If you can't even pick yourself up, you might as well stay here and die, fool." With one last, contemptuous glance at Norik, Galeona started toward the steps. "No!" Anger and fear vied for supremacy in him, anger and fear of the likes the fighter could never have imagined. As the witch fought her way to what might be freedom, abandoning Norik to whatever fate awaited him, the urge to strike out, to punish her for her betrayal, grew almost overwhelming. Norik pointed at her with his left hand. Words of power gathered on his lips, ready to be spoken. With one quick phrase, he would rid himself of the treacherous woman. "Damn it! No, I won't!" He turned from her, pulled down his hand. Let her flee without him if she liked. He would not have another death on his hands. Unfortunately, the armor did not agree. The hand rose again, this time against Norik's will. He struggled to lower it, but as since almost from the beginning of this terrible quest, the soldier found himself not the master, but simply the means. Bardic's armor sought retribution for Galeona's failing, and it would have that retribution, regardless of what its host wanted. The gauntlet flared crimson. Their surroundings still in complete flux, the dark-skinned enchantress had only now made it to the twisting staircase. To her misfortune, however, it shifted to the side, forcing her to readjust her path. As Norik's hand came up, Galeona managed at last to set a foot on the first and second steps. "No!" shouted Norik at the gauntlet. He looked at the fleeing woman, who had not bothered to take even the slightest parting glimpse at her struggling companion. "Run! Hurry! Get out of here!" Only after he had blurted out the warning did Norik realize what he had done. Those words, more than anything else, caused Galeona to pause and look over her shoulder, costing her the precious seconds she had needed. The dark words that the fighter had struggled not to say burst free. Galeona saw what he did and reacted, striking back. She pointed at the prone figure, mouthing a single harsh word that some memory not of Norik Vizarin's past recognized as a spell most foul. Brilliant blue flames surrounded the witch, even as she finished speaking. Galeona raised her head and howled once in utter agony, then burned away to ash in the blink of an eye. Norik, though, had no time to acknowledge her terrible demise, for suddenly his entire body became racked in pain, as if each bone within sought to break apart. Norik could feel even the tiniest of them slowly but inexorably cracking. Although the armor's magic had destroyed her, Galeona had succeeded in her own spellcasting. He screamed, shaking uncontrollably. Worse, despite his agony, the armor did nothing to help. and instead appeared to be trying to rise so that it now could use the very staircase upon which the sorceress had perished. Yet although the suit made it to the steps, it could go no farther. Each time it tried, an invisible force buffeted it back. Norik's fist slammed against air, sending new shockwaves through the already suffering man. "Please," he croaked, not caring that only the armor could possibly hear him. "Please, help." "Norik." Through tear-drenched eyes, he tried to focus on the voice. A woman's voice. Did the ghost of Galiona call to him to join her in death? "Norik, Viserin." No, a different voice, young but commanding. He managed to turn his head some, although the action caused more torture within. In the distance, a vaguely familiar woman, pale of skin but black of hair, futilely reached out to him from what appeared to be a crystalline doorway at the top of yet another flight of stairs. Behind her stood another figure, this one male, and with long, wild hair and a beard, both as white as snow. He looked suspicious, curious, and frightened all at the same time. He also looked even more familiar than the woman. To Norik, he could be only one person. "Horizon," the soldier blurted. One of the gloved hands immediately came up, the gauntlet ablaze with magical fury. Bartek's armor had reacted to the name, and not with pleasure. Norik could feel the formation of a spell, one that would make Galiona's death seem a peaceful end. But as if reacting in turn to the armor, an awful moaning arose, as if the very building itself took offense to what it saw. Horizon and the woman suddenly disappeared as the stairway shifted a different direction and new walls formed. Norik discovered himself suddenly standing in a high-columned hall that looked as if a grand ball had just ended. Yet even that changed quickly. No matter what the room, no matter where the woman and Horizon had gone, the armor did not care. Another spell erupted from the fighter's mouth, and a ball of molten earth flew from his hand, exploding seconds later against the nearest wall. The moaning became a roar. The entire sanctuary shook. A tremendous force buffeted Norik from every side. Worse, he realized that not only did the air close in on him, but so did the walls and the ceiling. Even the floor rose. Norik raised his arms, now evidently his own again, in a last futile effort to staff off the onrushing walls. The meal had been a sumptuous one, better by far than any Kara could have imagined, including those which Captain Geronin had served her. If not for the fact that she was the prisoner of an insane mage, she might have enjoyed it even more. During the meal, the necromancer had tried on more than one occasion to pluck some bit of reason from the white-haired sorcerer, but from Horizon she had only received babbled words and inconsistent information. At one point he had spoken of having discovered by accident the arcane sanctuary, the name by which legend called Horizon's tomb. Then he had told Kara that he had built it all by himself, through masterful sorcery. Another time, Horizon had told his prisoner that he had come to Aranok to study the massive convergence of spiritual ley lines centered in and around the city's present location. Even she had heard that mages could tap the mystical energies of this region far better than in any other spot in all the world. However, afterward he had spoken, with great trepidation, of fleeing to this side of the seas in fear that his brother's dark legacy still followed him. Gradually, Kara came to feel as if she spoke to two distinct men, one who truly was Horizon, and another who simply thought he was. She could only think that the terrible trials through which Bartek's brother had suffered, especially the horrific war against his own sibling, had combined with his centuries-long seclusion to tear apart his already fragile mind. The necromancer grew somewhat sympathetic to his plight, but never did she forget that not only did this mad sorcerer still keep her in his underground labyrinth against her will, but also that in times past his magic had, on occasion, been as black as Bartek's had ever been. One other thing Kara had noted that unnerved her as much as her host's sanity. The arcane sanctuary itself acted as if more than simply an extension of Horizon's tremendous power. Many times, she could have sworn that it, too, had a mind, a personality, even. Sometimes she would note the room around her shift subtly, the walls moving, and the general design transforming, even when the wizard paid it no mind. Kara had even noticed that the table and the food changed. More to the point, when the necromancer had tried to push Horazon on the matter of Bartok, a peculiar darkness had slowly begun to pervade her surroundings, almost as if the edifice itself wished an end to the troubling topic. When they had finished, Horazon had immediately bid her to rise. Here, in his sanctum, he had not babbled too much about the evil, but still the watery-eyed figure acted with caution in all things. "We must be careful," Horazon had muttered, standing. "At all times we must be careful. Come, there is much to do." Her thoughts more on escape than his constant warnings, Kara had also risen, only to see a sight so startling that it had made her knock her chair over. From the table itself had emerged a hand completely formed of the wood. The hand had seized her empty plate and had dragged it down into the table. At the same time, other hands had materialized, each seizing an object and dragging it, too, into the table. Still stunned, Kara had stepped back, only then discovering that the reason she had not heard her chair strike the floor had been because two more appendages formed from the marble at her feet had caught the piece of furniture before it could hit. "Come," Horazon had called, his expression now somewhat peevish. He seemed not at all disturbed by the unsettling appendages. "No time to waste! No time to waste!" While the dining hall had worked to clear itself, he had led her up a flight of stairs, then through a polished oak door. Behind the door lay another stairway, this one going back down. Despite having wanted to question the trustfulness of their path, the young dark mage had quietly followed, even when that set of steps had ended at yet another doorway, which seemed to lead back to the vast hall again. Only when Horazon had opened the door, and instead of the great hall she had been confronted with a wizard's laboratory, had Kara finally blurted out something. "This is impossible. This room shouldn't be here." He had looked at her as if she had been the mad one. "Of course it should be. I was looking for it, after all. What a silly thing to say. If you look for a room, it should be where you want it, you know." "But—" Kara had ceased her protest, unable to argue with the facts before her very eyes. Here should have stood the grand room in which she and Horazon had eaten, but instead this imposing, if disorderly, chamber had greeted her. Thinking back to the impossible journeys she had already made in the sanctuary, the dark-haired spellcaster had finally come to the conclusion that the ancient mage's home could not possibly completely exist on the mortal plane. Even though no architect could have ever solved the physical problems she had encountered, it had been said of the most powerful Viserai that some had learned to actually manipulate the very fabric of reality itself, to create for their use what some called pocket universes, where the laws of nature were what their masters decided it should be. Could that have been what Horazon had accomplished with the arcane sanctuary? Kara could find no other explanation for everything she had experienced. If so, he had created a marvel such as not ever seen before in all the world. Despite his ragged robe and otherwise unkempt appearance, in this chamber Horazon had taken on a more formidable look. When he had stepped to the center of the room, raising his arms and beckoning to the ceiling, Kara had expected fire and lightning to play from his fingers. She had expected winds to rise from nowhere, and perhaps even the Viserai's body to glow bright. Instead, he had simply turned back to her and said, "I brought you here, but I don't know why." After taking a moment to register this odd statement, the necromancer had replied, "Is it because of the armor? Your brother's armor?" He had stared up at the ceiling again. "Is it?" The ceiling, of course, had not answered. "Horazon, you must remember what they did with your brother's body, your people and mine." Again, the ceiling. "What was done with it? Ah, yes, no wonder I don't remember." Feeling as if she might as well have been talking to the ceiling herself, Kara had pressed. "Listen to me, Horazon." Someone managed to steal his enchanted armor from the tomb. I've followed them all the way here. He may even be in Lutko Lane at this moment. We need to find him, to take the armor back. There's no telling what evil still lurks within it.
Evil?
His eyes had taken on a wide, animalistic look.
Evil? Here?
Kara had bitten back a curse. She had stirred him up again.
So much evil about. I must be careful.
A condemning finger had pointed at her.
You must go.
Horazon, It had been at that moment that something had happened, something that passed between the wizard and his lair. Seconds later, she had felt the entire sanctum shiver, a shiver more that of a living thing, not simply a structure caught in some shockwave.
No, no, no! I must hide! I must hide!
Horazon had looked completely panic-stricken. He might have even fled from the chamber, but the room again transformed. The sorcerer's tables of equipment and chemicals receded from the two, and from the floor a gigantic, crystalline sphere arose to eye level. A huge hand formed from the stone below, keeping it there. In the center of the sphere, a vision had coalesced. A vision of a man whom Kara Nightshadow had never truly seen, but had still been able to identify immediately, thanks to the crimson armor he wore.
It's him, Norik Vizaran. He has the armor. Bartek?
Her mad companion had snapped.
No! Bartek's come for me!
She had seized him by the arm, daring death in the hopes of finally bringing a conclusion to this dangerous quest.
Horazon, where is he? Is that part of the sanctuary, too?
In the sphere, Norik Vizaran and a dark-skinned woman had rushed through a web-enshrouded corridor filled with ancient statues carved in the fashion of the Viserai. Norik had carried a monstrous black sword and had looked ready to use it. Kara had wondered then if Satan Trist had spoken too well of his former friend. Here had looked a man who had seemed very capable of the outrageous murders. Regardless of the answer to that, Kara had known she could not come this close and fail.
Answer me. Is that part of the sanctuary? It must be. Yes, it is. Now leave me be.
He had torn free from her, headed to the door, only to be stopped there by hands sprouting from the floor and walls, hands that had kept him from abandoning the necromancer.
What?
She had been able to say no more, startled by what seemed the vehemence in the hand's actions. Horazon's very stronghold had seemed in rebellion, forcing him to return to Kara.
Let me go! Let me go!
The mad sorcerer had cried out to the ceiling.
It's the evil. I mustn't let it get me.
As the raven-tressed woman had watched, a sullen expression had finally crossed Horazon's wrinkled face.
All right. All right.
And so he had returned to the sphere, pointed at the image. By this time, Norik had confronted one of the statues, shouted something in anger that the crystal did not relay, then raised the black blade as if prepared to strike. At the same time, Horazon cried, Grecos Dominius Ebois! Greco Dominius Mortu! Chaos had erupted in the scene, with walls, floors, and stairs shifting, materializing, or disappearing. In the midst of the madness, the two figures had struggled to survive. However, Norik Vizaran had been unable to save himself, falling near an edge and then being unable to rise because of the constant motion all around him. The woman, a witch in Kara's mind, had completely abandoned the helpless fighter, choosing instead to head toward what seemed a fairly stable set of stairs.
Greco Dominius Mortu!
Her companion snapped. Something in his tone had made Kara look at Horazon, and in his eyes she had read nothing but death for the pair. So, this had been how it would end. Not by the hands of the revenants, nor through her own sorcery, but by the fatal spells of Bartek's own crazed brother. For the witch, she had felt nothing, but because of Trist's tales of the veteran fighter, a spark of sadness had still touched her. Perhaps there had been a good man there once. But not at that moment. The The scene had revealed Norik determined to slay his wayward partner. He had pointed one gauntleted hand at her, shouted something. Only then had Kara noticed the look of horror and regret on his face. No satisfaction, no dark intent, only fear for what he would do to the fleeing woman. But that had made no sense unless...
What did he say, Horazon? Do you know what he said? I need to know.
From the crystalline sphere had suddenly burst a man's fearful voice. Damn it! I won't! Then, no! Run! Hurry! Get out of here! Not the bitter shouts of a vengeful murderer, and yet the image had still shown him ready to strike down his fleeing companion. However, his expression had continued to belie that notion. Norik Vizeren had actually appeared as if he battled for control of himself, or, of course.
Horazon, you must stop this. You must help them.
Help them? No, no. Destroy them, and I destroy the evil at last. Yes, at last.
Kara had glanced at the sphere again, just in time to witness not only the witch's awful demise, but the woman's own last attack on the fighter. Norik's cries had filled Horazon's chamber, the sphere apparently still fulfilling the necromancer's previous request.
Listen to me. The evil is in the armor, not the man. Don't you see? His death would be a travesty, a tipping of the balance.
Frustrated at Horazon's unyielding expression, she had glared up at the ceiling. The wizard seemed to consult some power up there, some power that did not merely exist in his mind. To it, she had cried,
Bartek was the monster, not the one clad in his armor, and only Bartek would take a life so.
Once more gazing at the mad mage, she concluded,
Or is Horazon just like his brother?
The reaction to her desperate declarations had startled even Kara. From every wall, from even the ceiling and the floor, mouths had formed in the stone. Only one word had issued from each, the same word, over and over. No, no, no. The crystalline sphere had suddenly expanded, and even more startling, opened up. Within it had arisen a stairway, which Kara had imagined had to lead somehow, as impossible as it had seemed, directly to the struggling Norik. Horazon had refused to aid her, but the arcane sanctuary had not. The necromancer had immediately rushed to the crystal, pausing only when she came to the first step. Despite having offered her this path, the enchanted sanctum had continued to assault Norik, making rescue difficult. Momentarily uncertain, Kara had initially chosen to call to the fighter to see if he could perhaps make it to her without her having to enter the chaos. He had responded to the second call by shouting Horazon's name. Confused, Kara had withdrawn the hand she had offered, a symbolic gesture intended to let him know she had meant only help. As she had done that, he, in turn, had reacted oddly, moving as if he intended not to come to the necromancer, but to slay her.
The evil awakens,
a voice had muttered behind her. Horazon. She had not realized that he had stepped into sight. Kara had assumed that the mad mage had stayed far from the danger. She had known then why Norik, or rather the armor, had reacted so. The enchanted armor had yet sought to fulfill its creator's greatest desire, to slay the accursed brother. But before it had been able to strike, the sanctuary had chosen once more to take command of the situation. Norik and his surroundings had regressed, pulling farther and farther back, almost vanishing from sight. Kara had seen the walls there begin to converge, as if the astonishing edifice had sought to box its adversary in, and worse. It had occurred to her only at the last that, with the armor seeking Horazon's imminent destruction, the best choice for the arcane sanctuary had been to end this once and for all, even if it meant, after all, the death of an innocent. Better to destroy both the armor and Norik Vizeren than give Bartek's legacy another chance to succeed. But such a death went against the balance that Kara Nightshadow had been trained to preserve. Now, with Norik's doom looming, the necromancer leapt into the chaos within the crystalline sphere, hoping that Horizon's apparently sentient domain would do for her what it would not for the hapless fighter. Hoping that it would not decide that Kara, too, was expendable.